Welcome to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast where seeing things differently inspires limitless possibilities. This podcast is being brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Limitless was created in order to inform, educate, entertain, and share stories from within the blind and partially sighted community in order to show the world that the opportunities for those who are blind or partially sighted are truly limitless. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your host, the Executive Director and Founder of Blind Beginnings, Sean Marcellet.
Welcome back to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. I'm your host, Sean Marcellet. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. We have another exciting topic. We are talking about moving out when you're blind or partially sighted, and we have a full house today. So we have Mika, Ella, Randy, and Jill. And maybe I'll start by asking Mika and Ella to introduce yourselves, remind us just briefly about your level of vision and why this was a topic that you wanted to talk about on the podcast.
Hello, this is Ella. I am completely blind. I can see light out of one eye, but that's it. And I was born with this level of vision. The reason why I wanted to do this podcast is because moving out is something that has really been concerning me, especially like for people who are blind, it can really be intimidating. I think there's just additional challenges when moving out and things to consider when you're moving out as a completely blind person. And so, and especially because my parents are worried about it as well. Like I would say even more so than I am. So I figured this would be something really important to talk about on a podcast such as this one.
Hi, I'm Mika, and I was born with a condition called Peters anomaly. I have partial vision mostly in my left eye, and I can see shapes, colors, and light, and I have trouble seeing details unless I'm super up close. And the reason why I wanted to record this episode was because I'm currently 20 right now as of recording this, and I kind of just feel like I'm at a place in my life where I just need to have some change and be on my own and move out. And I have multiple reasons for this, but mainly because I live in North Vancouver. And for most of my needs, I would say in terms of being far away from places, the North Shore just isn't really working for me. And I'd like to be somewhere closer to a station apparently, but also just with greater independence and just being able to make certain decisions and kind of find my own and find where I belong. And I think it's really overwhelming, and I definitely feel overwhelmed thinking about it. So I'm really excited to hopefully learn some tips and tricks.
Awesome. And Randy and Jill, can you tell us a little bit about your vision and maybe like the preview of your moving out situation? How old were you? What did you move from? Where did you move to? Yeah, that's a good place to get us started, I feel like.
So I'm Jill. I have an eye condition called retinopathy of prematurity. So I was low vision and now I'm totally blind. And I was totally blind when I did move out on my own. I had just turned 19 when I moved from my small northeastern BC town to the Lower Mainland. So, and I'm 25 now, so I've been on my own for, I think it's 7 years now, roughly.
Okay. And when you first moved out, what did you move into residence or an apartment or?
I moved into an apartment sharing it with like an older blind lady. And it was about a 15-minute bus ride away from Vancouver Community College where I was attending for a year. So that was my first experience, I guess, living on my own.
Hello, my name's Randy. I'm visually impaired. I'm on the fairly high end of the spectrum, so mostly I just use average print, but I can't see very well at distance. I also moved from a central interior small north town down to the Lower Mainland, specifically Richmond originally. And at the time I was 17. I didn't graduate early. I'm just a late birthday in the year. So I graduated and moved out about 2 weeks after school actually ended. And moved into an apartment with a previous high school ex-boyfriend at the time. And then 6 months later, the lease was up and I moved in with some friends.
And I will dig way back into the archives of my memory. I moved out when I was 20, I think, and I moved into residence. So I did like university transfer from college to university. And when I transferred to university, I moved into residence. So it was my third year. And my first living situation was 5 other women and me in what they called a pod, which was weird because it was 6 of us, where we each had our own bedroom, but we shared a kitchen, living room, bathroom situation. And okay, so Nika and Ella are really going to ask the questions today, and we will do our best to answer those questions.
So what do you guys like about moving out? What inspired you to move? I know you guys talked about it, but like, what do you enjoy about living on your own now that you've actually moved out?
Well, I think you almost touched on 2 different questions there, because I heard what do you enjoy about it and what inspired you to do it. And at least for me, those aren't the same thing. I'm from 100 Mile House, and pretty much unless you go off to a trades or like the work in the oil fields or something, everybody has to move out for university because there is no university in town. Or I guess you could do some distance learning, but there's very few real educational opportunities after high school. And so pretty much if you have the grades, you're automatically going to be moving somewhere that isn't your hometown.
Yeah. And like I grew up in Dawson Creek, and like similar to Randy and 100 Mile House. But what I also found, especially in like a small town like that, is that there are hardly any, if any, resources for people who are blind or visually impaired. Especially once you leave high school, like there's literally nothing. And I had come down to the Lower Mainland, and specifically Mission, I believe it was, for summer camps. I think it was like for 5 summers before I actually moved down here. So I ended up forming like a lot of friends in the blind community, and kind of, you know, hearing about their experiences and all the opportunities they had with that down here. So that was a big reason for me wanting to move. I also moved for university as well. But to me, those 2 things kind of went hand in hand for me, because I never grew up having or being part of like a blind community. So that was a big factor as well at the time.
I think for me, when I first moved out, I just really wanted to be away from my parents. Can I just be honest?
It's true.
Read my mind, Dawn.
It's a definite bonus sometimes.
Yeah, I love.
You have to cook for yourself now.
Oh, well, I lived on bagels for that first year. So yeah, the cooking, not a strong suit for me, but I just wanted to make my own decisions, and I wanted to be independent. And, you know, I could have stayed at home. I lived in New Westminster, and I could take a bus for like an hour and 15 minutes to get to UBC if I wanted to, but I really didn't. I really wanted to try moving out on my own.
Well, it's funny because you kind of talked about like how long that commute would have been for you to go to school. Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned before, I lived in an apartment near Vancouver Community College for the year that I was there. And then I ended up transferring to Simon Fraser University. And that transit would have been like a solid 2 hours there and back. And there's no way I was going to do that. That was to me, that seemed like a big waste of my time. Like I could have been, you know, studying or sleeping or something. Like I could have it was a more productive time. So I ended up moving to dorms after that first year too. So I guess I have a similar experience to you with that.
Yeah. How do you know if you're ready to move out in the first place? Just because I feel like I've kind of been hemming and hawing about moving out for like the past 5 years. And I'm also kind of in a similar situation because it takes me an hour and a half to commute to Langara. So that's like 3 hours that I'm spending transiting every day. Mm-hmm. But I guess like, how do you know? Yeah. Like, how do you really know if you're ready?
I don't know. I think it was just, you know, I was 19, and at that time, all of my siblings had moved away to college or moved out on their own. And I was the only one still at home. Me and my twin sister being the youngest in our family. And I just like, I love my parents and they were great, but I just wanted to do stuff for myself. And I was really getting that urge to be independent. And, you know, I kind of wanted what my siblings had by being on their own. And then also just like the progression of opportunities that fell into my lap, like moving down here for school and stuff like that. It all kind of just fell into place. And I kind of just like had the idea in my head that I want to move out and go down to the Lower Mainland, because when I had visited growing up, I really enjoyed being there. So, and I knew I always wanted to stay in BC. So it seemed like a really good place for me to go to at the time. And then, like I said, like the blind community was something I wanted more of. And then just the college and university opportunities I had down here were way more than I would have gotten in Dawson. So I think it was just like seeing what my siblings and a lot of my friends even at the time had, and then just kind of wanting that and wanting to prove that I could do it, I think was a big part as well.
Well, for me, it wasn't really, I mean, it was a thought out plan, but it was kind of just like, I don't know, I guess like the people I was in, we were in French immersion, we were the kids that got good grades. It was always just like a assumed master plan of we graduate, we go to university, we get whatever degree we're doing, you know, and it just happens. And so in my mind, I guess to myself, because there was no pressure from my family, but there was just no other option, but that was what was going to be, you know? And I think sometimes you might never know, because my original plan that I had so well thought out did not pan out. I ended up withdrawing from the courses I was in after about 6 months because I was having some health issues, and I've been working retail since, which was not the plan, you know, but you know, sometimes you might not know for sure, but it will be down to like, okay, if I have this thing I absolutely need in place and I have this, you know, whether it's finances or life skills or the place to live, the plan of how you'll get places, you know, if you have these things, you sometimes have to, well, if it's not now, it's never, or it won't be for a long time, and try it. And there might be, you know, a failing in a sense if, you know, maybe you aren't ready and you end up having to move back home for a bit. And so far that hasn't happened to me, but you know, there's a lot to be said too for, you know, saving rent if your parents don't charge you rent.
Well, how did your parents feel about your decision to move out? Like, I think it's very common for people who are blind and especially their parents, to have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about their blind child moving away. And also, were there any skills in particular that maybe they were lacking, but when you moved out, did you realize you were maybe lacking skills? Was that an issue?
In regards to like how my parents felt, it's kind of a funny story. So I remember I was sitting at the table for dinner with my mom and stepdad, and this is when I was still kind of thinking about it, but didn't really like voice it out loud yet. And I asked them during dinner what they thought about me possibly moving to Vancouver. And my mom kind of stops and she looks at me and she's like, "What would you do if I said no?" And I'm like, "I would probably still go anyways." And she's like, "That's what I thought." And that was pretty much that part of the conversation. And my mom had a lot more, like, she was a lot more worried about it than my stepdad was, especially because she can be like quite protective. And, you know, she's got pretty used to like helping me with certain things. But my stepdad has always been really encouraging and motivating. And like, he's like, "Do what you want. If it doesn't work out, we'll figure it out." He's always been that way with me. So he was like fully on board from the moment I said it. And then my biological dad, he was very skeptical about it because, you know, small town, and you look at a big city and all you ever really hear about on the news in a big city is the crime rate. So he was really worried that, you know, if I moved down here by myself and I didn't have anyone who could help me or protect me or something like that. And he was really worried about my safety. So all three of my parents had different perspectives, but none of them actually stopped me from doing it because they knew that it's something I really wanted. And, you know, I've proven to them over the last 7 years that I was fully capable of doing it and made it happen. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation for me with my parents.
I was kind of indoctrinated in independence and self-advocacy at a fairly young age because my mom has the same condition I do, which is a rarity mostly among the blind community. So, she'd kind of already done all the hurdle things and then went into it with this is how we're going to face these things and how you're going to, do this and talk to your teachers and get a tour of your school or, etc. So, I don't know how she felt about I was the youngest of two, and then, going from a small town to a big city, but it's kind of, we have fairly parallel lives. She grew up in Langley and then moved to Richmond and worked in downtown Vancouver. And I moved a little bit further away than that. But, as for skills and stuff, I already had from a reasonably young age, we were actually very lucky and privileged in that we did not have many chores overall, but I did know, I learned over time how to cook and do laundry and stuff like that. So that wasn't anything I had to learn after. Not that I can cook better now than I did then, but I at least knew how to cook for myself, because feeding yourself is definitely a requirement.
Well, there's always bagels.
But what if you don't like bagels?
Then everyone loves bagels.
Well, then I guess
you have toast.
You could bake sandwiches or something.
That's what I lived on.
I kind of want to jump in on the skills part because I was very I knew how to clean really well because my mom had my sister and I cleaning the house. That was our Saturday routine for a very long time. And I knew how to do laundry and I had pretty good mobility skills, but cooking, no. So I seriously, I'm not even joking, would buy 3 dozen bagels every Wednesday because they were there was some kind of special deal on bagels by the dozen on Wednesdays. And I would have my cinnamon raisin bagel for breakfast and my jalapeno cheese bagel for lunch. And then for dinner, I would make a salad or I would make pasta. That was pretty much all I knew how to make. And then I'd have my chocolate chip bagel for dessert. So yeah.
I love that there's different categories of bagels.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
I still never was able to find a jalapeno cheddar bagel anywhere.
Oh, they're delicious. But what about you, Jill? I feel like you knew how to do a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, I was pretty lucky in the sense that throughout, I guess grade 10 to 12, after I lost my sight, my teacher for the visually impaired was very focused on making me a well-rounded person, which included a lot of life skills. So he and I mainly did cooking and baking and orientation mobility. And then my mom and dad, taught me to cook and kind of clean more. So I was really lucky that with cooking, I fell in love with it really quickly. Of course, going from low vision roughly to fully blind and the quick amount that I did, it was a pretty big learning curve for me, especially in the kitchen, because I was so used to getting close to stuff to see it in the kitchen. And then I didn't have to anymore. So I'm I don't have to stand so close. This is so weird. But when I moved out, I did move into apartments. So we had our own washer and dryer in the apartment, and I had my own bathroom, and we shared the kitchen and everything. So I did have all those skills that you needed to move out, cooking, cleaning, O&M, and the only thing that was really that I didn't really know about or know necessarily how to do was the level of recycling and compost that happens in the Lower Mainland. In my hometown,
we didn't have those services until recently. Really,
yeah, same. Dawson didn't have any kind of major recycling thing aside from paper and bottles and cans.
You could drive to the bottle depots and drop off.
You could, quote unquote, drive to, right? So and compost was not a thing until recently, and that's still kind of iffy. But so when I moved down here, I didn't really know what composting was and how it worked, and I thought it was really disgusting that you just had a container of banana peels and stuff in your kitchen just sitting there. I thought it was disgusting. It was really it's still not my favorite thing ever. And
Oh,
even like people recycle like their hard plastic, like a sour cream container, for example, or yogurt cups, or like saran wrap and stuff. People recycle all that, and we never did growing up. So that was a really big thing for me to get used to down here. So.
And you had
Yeah.
your own washer and dryer when you moved in. That's luxury.
I know. It was a really cute little
Most of us have to
size.
share.
Oh God, no, thank God. I did in dorms and it was never a good experience. So I'm glad.
I mean, I haven't
my
had
first
really,
experience was an apartment, to be honest.
yeah, I've
What
never
are
really had bad experiences with shared laundry, but just
Oh man.
for
Yeah,
anybody
I had to.
moving out, don't expect to have an apartment with your own laundry, washer and dryer inside your apartment. You'll probably
It
have to
can
go down to a
happen.
communal room.
It can happen, but it
It's-
depends on where you are and what you do.
It also
Yeah.
depends on how much your rent budget is.
Yes, very true.
I lived in a basement suite and there was no laundry, and I actually had to walk 2 blocks to the laundromat carrying my laundry basket with my
No
white
way.
cane in my other hand.
I love that image.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
That's so
I didn't
funny.
live there for very long.
Fair enough. It is a lot nicer having it in your own suite.
Yes,
I'll be honest.
definitely.
What are the top 5 skills that you'd recommend knowing how to do before moving out? Just because I feel like you just mentioned a lot of stuff. So I guess just breaking it down to a top 5 list.
The obvious top couple of them are going to be feeding yourself in one way or another, even if that means microwave cooking or stovetop cooking, whatever format that comes out to be. And laundry, because you need to be presentable. Jill, what are your next couple?
Mine would be to learn how to clean your bathroom and your floors and your kitchen counters properly, because those all get disgusting real fast. And yeah, I've had a few bad experiences either with previous roommates and in dorms where I am very, very picky about my bathroom and kitchen, especially being clean. But how many young blind people know how to clean a toilet or a shower, for example? Like that's something I didn't do growing up. So my mom, she's like, "Yo, you're gonna learn this no matter what before you move out." Like it sounds really funny, and it's honestly quite simple, but that was one of her goals, was that all her kids knew how to clean the toilet. And it's a really important skill to have, and that be on the top. That's one of my top, and also having good orientation mobility, both with your cane and learning the transit to wherever you're moving to, because Randy might be able to attest to this, but in small towns, you have either no transit or like 2 buses.
What transit?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And their buses don't have the audible or like the announcement system. So you have to rely fully on the bus driver to let you know when to get off. And then they forget and you have to do the whole hour loop again. And it's not fun.
I don't even know
Or
if my bus has bus stops. Like, I don't even know if the bus stops have names. I've
Or
used
in
that bus
our
like
situation,
twice.
Our situation, your bus driver stops for a deer in the road. It's quite a process. I remember that vividly. It was great. But here, like, I knew that Vancouver and the Lower Mainland had the SkyTrain and bus systems, and they're great, but I had no idea how to use them. And even just like using the audible signals to cross the street, my hometown didn't have one, as far as I know.
A street?
Well, a lot of them were dirt streets, okay? They're not very well. Yeah, we didn't have sidewalks very much either. Yeah, there's no sidewalks sometimes.
It's just gravel.
Yeah, but it's interesting experience.
Like outside of the business district.
Yes,
we're not
exactly,
that uncivilized.
No, but like, so that was a big thing for me. It's like I lived down near, I believe it was near Broadway when I first moved down here, and it's a pretty busy street. I don't know how many lanes it is, I forget, but it's a very busy street. And I remember coming up to that intersection, like, I don't know what the hell I'm gonna do here. Like, and so I think a really big important skill to have is orientation mobility with your cane, the transit, possibly the GPS apps if you find them useful, and also connecting with an orientation mobility instructor. I thankfully had a lot of friends who recommended a really, really great O&M instructor And she helped me out. She literally taught me the entire transit system, all the routes I needed, like to and from school, the grocery store, what have you. She was amazing, especially those first, I don't know, 6 months to a year. And I still get her help as I need it now. So yeah, O&M in all those senses is very, very important, I think.
I'm gonna add one, knowing how to get groceries. Or
Yeah.
bagels. I mean, whatever.
Your
but,
bagels.
like,
Yeah.
knowing how to get the food is pretty important as well.
Well, when I moved down, because I use the Instacart like grocery delivery app now. But when I moved down here, as far as I know, that wasn't a thing quite yet. So like there's nothing quite like having an armful of groceries, using your cane, and like feeling all lopsided down the sidewalk trying to get to the bus stop to get home with your groceries. And I remember sitting on the bus and I had my groceries kind of on the floor between my feet and beside me a little bit because it was like those big reusable bags. And I remember an older lady with a walker came on and like squished all my groceries. And it was really upset. Right. So like it's thankfully, I think the Instacart grocery delivery apps do help a lot in the situation. But like it's still really important to know how to go to a grocery store and, find the customer service desk, get a clerk to help you, like know what you want, get them to read you the prices so you know how much you're spending. Because especially if you move out on your own for the first time, you have to learn to budget, including groceries, rent, your cell phone bill, what have you. So like actually knowing how much your groceries and each thing of food is going to cost you is also really important, that I think a lot of people overlook. So
I feel like especially for like certain cultural stores, like I noticed Instacart has a lot of like Walmart, Save On, and I love it. But there's a lot of things that my family gets that are kind of Persian. Like I'm from Iran, my family, so a lot of Persian exclusive items can only be found from those stores, and typically those stores aren't on Instacart.
Yeah, and even just like another, I think important, I guess thing to have on that list is to get connected with a dentist and a family doctor if possible. Because you don't know, don't know what's going to happen if you get a cavity, for example, or like you fall and hurt yourself or whatever, what have you. Like, it's really important to have those services and, know where the buildings are, but also like, find one that works for you. And just, I think that's a big thing people don't really think about at the time of moving out is like, oh, I need a family doctor and a dentist and whatever else you need medically, an eye doctor in my case. So, like when I moved down here, I had to find all of those, and I couldn't really rely on my parents to help me because they were 15 hours away. They don't know anything about the Lower Mainland and where to even start looking for that kind of stuff. So I had to either, word of mouth from friends or just do some research in my area. So that's another important thing, I think, as well.
How was it kind of just going from a place of high support to having almost zero support? Just because I'm in a situation where I get a lot of support where I am. And if I were to decide to move out, I would basically be cut off and have none at all.
So at least in my experience, FaceTime is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, especially if I lived when I was living in the first apartment I moved to, I was pretty much on my own. The lady who I lived with, like we interacted, but like not much because we were just on very different schedules and stuff. That, how like if you put some items in your cupboard and you think they're organized and you go back and they're like, I don't remember what can this is and that is, like I could easily FaceTime my mom or sister or whoever and get them, to be eyeballs is pretty much what I would call it. So like I feel like it's a big, it might depend culturally, but I think might be a possible big misconception that you're going to have no support when you move out. Your family is always going to be there. You end up making connections in your community. And like I live near a Shoppers Drug Mart, and there's this one clerk who like always says hi and comes and offers help if I need it, just by making that connection, right? So like it's not like you're going to be thrown into a situation where you have no one whatsoever to help you if you need it. There's always going to be some level of support, whether that's, through Blind Beginnings or just your neighbor, for example, or something like, or even your parents, if, cultural speaking, if that's still a thing. Like, I don't know. I just feel like having like no support is, I think, a bit of a misconception. And like I said, like my biggest thing is like, if I, visually, if there's something I couldn't figure out on my own, I could easily FaceTime someone sighted, whether it be a family member or a friend, and they were more than happy to help me. So that's kind of how I still had the support, but there's a different level of independence where, it was up to me to ask for the help. But I also liked the fact that I, had the chance to try and figure it out for myself first. And then if I couldn't figure it out, then get the support and the help.
I actually had, I moved to England for an internship for 6 months. And there was, obviously I didn't know anyone in England. My parents were back here in Canada, and I literally did not know where I was going to be living. I knew where I was going to be living was organized for me, but I didn't know until I got there what the situation was going to be, where I would get groceries, just all the things. And even in that situation where I didn't know anybody, there were people, right? There's always people. I think nowadays there's apps you can use that will help you, and you can order your groceries, and like so many more options than I had when I moved out. But I think even if your family's far, far away or not available to you, you'll always find support.
I think it also depends what kind of support, because, your emotional support might be your family over the phone at a distance, but then maybe you have, a friend that can come be your eyes and help you label your appliances when you move in. Or if you end up moving in with roommates, then they can help you out. I was often the eyeballs for the other roommates I was living with for a couple of different apartments, actually. And then, so it's going to kind of depend what situation you move into, and some of it might not come until you kind of get a footing and make some new friends. If you're completely moving to a new place, like many hours away, or at least not easily returnable, generally speaking, if you move out, if your parents live in the Lower Mainland, you're probably within a reasonable distance of commute of them if you're going to move out within the Lower Mainland. But
and even like, if, like for Randy and I, our parents are quite a ways away from us. Like, I'm not sure about your experience or your situation, Randy, but like when I moved down here, my mom, she came with me like she did with all my siblings. So it wasn't, oh, you're blind and I have to come help you. It was, I did this for all your other siblings, so I'm going to do it for you. And she did the basics. Like, she's like, I'm going to make sure you have, the medication you might need, like Advil or Gravol or something. And I'll get you your first round of groceries. And like, my mom did that for all my siblings. So she, wanted to do it for me. And, having your kid move out for their first time is pretty like hard on the parent. So more often than not, at least in my experience, whether you move out, only 20 minutes away from where you grew up or hours away from where you grew up, your parents are going to want to come and help you set stuff up and organize your life and possibly show you around. And like my mom and I went for a walk around my neighborhood, and she pointed out like, oh, here's those Shoppers, or here's the Safeway, or, oh, there's a big park across the street, like whatever it was. Again, like, not everyone's situation is going to be the same, and you might not have that same opportunity, but your parent, like, it's not like your parents are going to kick you out on the front step and say, go for it. Like, they're going to help you out and, help you figure it out a little bit, especially at the beginning, especially your first time moving out.
And moving out.
Cultures are very different.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Everyone's situation.
That's not entirely true, because
that's
people
my situation.
Probably have been told you're 18 now, move out.
I'm being very clear that that's my situation. Like,
we're
culturally
relatively lucky in that I share that. My parents moved me down, and we found the stores nearby, and we tried the SkyTrain before. Just here you go, off you go. But moving out, if you are on good terms with your family, moving out is a big deal, whether you're blind, sighted, or dressed like a duck.
have landlords ever had an issue with your visual impairment when you were trying to rent a place?
I was lucky in the sense that the first place I moved into was, renting from an older blind lady who owned her apartment. So she's like, super for it, and she's super helpful. And then I remember when I moved into dorms, because I was in dorms for 2.5 years, I believe. And like they had other visually impaired students live there before, but what I personally didn't really like about it is that they clumped you all together in the sense that they assumed that what the previous blind person needed is what you needed. And they didn't really understand that, there's different levels of vision or different levels of independence. So that was something that I found really frustrating with dorms. I get that it's kind of like a landlord university setting sort of thing. But because you have like a residence office where you go register for a dorm and you get your keys and all that fun stuff. And there, like before I made any kind of connection with the staff at the residence office, there was a kind of a level of, oh, like, how are we supposed, like, how do we help you? What do you want us to do? Are you, oh, like, we know about so-and-so. Do you know him? I'm like, no, I just moved here. Like, I don't know this person. Don't compare me to him. Like, first, like, that was a big thing I noticed in dorms. Was, again, regards, I guess you could say, to the landlords. That, and also in dorms, like, if something, like a landlord, like, if something breaks in your apartment or wherever you're living, your landlord, in theory, is supposed to come help you fix it. But with dorms, it's a little bit different of a situation where you have to file like a maintenance claim or maintenance repair like form, and it's not very accessible, and your residence office is only open for certain hours. So it's definitely a unique situation for dorms in that sense, that I've noticed. And then when I moved into my third and current place, I was actually lucky in the sense that the landlord is extended family. So, anything that I need help with, whether, the sink wasn't working or something, like he would, like I could just text him and he'd come over and help me fix it. So I'm pretty lucky in that sense. That, and then I guess the only other thing I could say with landlords is that, at least in my situation, once I got, like I have a guide dog. So once I got her, you don't have to disclose to your landlord that you have a service dog, but it was my personal choice to do that. Because I wanted to have that open, honest relationship, and it made me feel a little bit sneaky in a way. And that's just my personal choice. People's decisions with that are different. And he, like with guide dogs, you don't have to pay a pet deposit because they're not, like they're a pet, but not technically a pet. So that was the only thing I really had to explain to him, that like, no, I don't actually have to pay a pet deposit because she's, helping me. She's assistant. She's a service dog. So that was kind of the only issue, I guess, related to any visual impairment stuff with landlords that I've had, but it was a very minor issue. And dorms, I guess, were the most unique situation for me.
Are landlords allowed to say like no to a service animal?
No, that is full out illegal. Full out illegal.
So I think there is one kind of exception, is if you're sharing shared kitchens and stuff in like a private place, something like that. But generally speaking, service dogs are not allowed to be discriminated against. You are not allowed to be discriminated against and be told no because you're blind to rent from somewhere. But you are more likely to face a hurdle if you have a dog than not, I would think, just because, the dog is an animal that they feel like they can argue against, whereas you're there with a cane, what is theoretically, that doesn't mean that people don't do it. But most of my experience has also been with rental companies in apartments as opposed to private people's homes that they're renting out the basement or the upstairs or something like that. So I'm not sure what those rules are.
I was meaning more like the landlord was concerned that you might burn the place down or forget that you left, like, sort of like liability concerns because somebody who's blind is living there. I feel like when I was looking for an apartment, there was one landlord that was concerned about that. And that's like, I've lived in a lot of different places. So that's one person out of, I don't know, more than 15 probably landlords that I interacted with. So for the most part, it's not been an issue for me, but occasionally you'll get somebody who's kind of nervous about that, I think.
Yeah, I've never, like, all the landlords that I've had have been, really great. I guess, I lived with a blind lady, so she was equally as independent. And then I lived with, like, my landlord's extended family member. So they know that I'm independent and capable of those, like, turning the stove off or, not flooding the bathroom or something. I kind of had the feeling, like, when I was in dorms that they were a bit more concerned with that. Especially, like, at the time that I was living in dorms, there's a lot of construction happening around the buildings. And they, didn't want to be liable for the blind kid falling in a hole or something. So, like, I ended up making a connection with, like, the residence office, like, manager kind of guy who, like, oversaw all, like, the construction and, like, maintenance and everything. So I actually had a really, like, he was a really good person to be connected to because he gave me a heads up if, this area is going to be blocked off of construction, or, oh, hey, there's been, like, an animal sighting over here or something. Like, that was a really good connection for me to make. Because, like, the school is going to cover themselves, especially, like Sean said, for liability. Right. But it's also really nice for me to have a heads up of those things. So, like, that was the only situation I've ever really felt like they were concerned about there being a blind person living in residence. But it's also mainly, like, in the dorm that I was living in, there was no elevator. It was just stairs. So they're like, oh, like, we don't want you to slip if the stairs are wet from the rain. I'm like, I can fully do stairs. It's okay. Like, but I get why they were worried about it. Right. So I think dorms possibly is a higher level of liability concerns for the residents / landlord people. But that's, I guess, the only experience I've ever had where they were worried about any safety related issues, whether to myself or the place I was living in itself.
And I'm pretty sure most of the landlord companies and representatives I've dealt with don't even remember I'm visually impaired. So,
Yeah.
Something I've kind of been thinking about as well is what about roommates in terms of safety precautions, just because I have been looking at different Craigslist ads, or even if you're in a situation where you are already living in the place and you're looking to interview potential roommates, seeking out roommate opportunities, what kind of safety precautions would you take as a, like, blind or visually impaired person?
For me, the current place I'm living in, I had a different roommate for the first year. And something that I was really concerned about with roommates is I didn't feel fully comfortable living with someone I didn't know, even just as an acquaintance. I was really kind of nervous for that. Like, I don't know this person. Are we going to live well together? Are they creepy and they're acting nice? Like, I was really concerned about that. So the roommate that I had for the first year, we had met a couple times at school. I pretty much just knew her name and knew that she was into rock climbing and knew that she was in, biology. That's all I really knew about her. But I, funny enough, felt like that was enough. And when I had made a post, because I had made a post through the school, like, Facebook pages, looking for a roommate, because I felt that, maybe we live close to the school and I would feel more comfortable having someone, like, be a university student or be close to my age. And I was a bit more comfortable with it being a female. And I was in the position where I could kind of, in a way, pick and choose the roommate a little bit. So I felt more comfortable with those factors. And it ended up being the girl that I had briefly met. And, like, we probably chatted for on and off for about a couple of days. And then we set up, like, a viewing of the apartment and everything like that. So yeah, I personally wasn't overly comfortable, at least at the time, living with someone I didn't know, even in this, like, a minor way. And I guess in, like, regards to, because she knew that I was visually impaired, but she didn't know much about it. And I guess in regards to, like, safety around the apartment, she had a lot of questions about like what she could do or like what I needed her to do to make it, safe around the apartment for me. So like, for example, like pushing the chair at the table or closing cupboard doors, stuff like not leaving the doors of the rooms like half open, stuff like that. So, cause that's another equal part of safety is just like, you can't be in a situation where everything you're worried about stepping around stuff or running into things because your roommate doesn't really care. So it was a pretty decent experience. We had very different levels of cleaning standards. So that became a really big issue with us. And it didn't end up working out, which is, it's fine. I have a good roommate now, which is my boyfriend. But yeah, I don't know. Those are kind of the main safety things for me in regards to roommates.
When I have been the person going in with somebody as a roommate, it's always been with somebody I had some connection with. I first moved in with an ex, then some friends, then a family connections basement. And then where I am now, I moved in with someone who I didn't know well. And it ended up not turning out well at the end, but most of it was fine. But we had a community connection. So it wasn't entirely a random stranger. But since then, I've been in the same location for 6 years. So I have done the process of looking like advertising for the roommate as opposed to being the person answering the available space. And so for safety wise of that stuff, if you're advertising or I guess looking, make sure if you're interested in a place, make sure they're willing to do a phone call because you can get a sense of a person and what they're telling you better over a phone than an email or a text or something. If you're going to go see it or if you're showing the place to somebody, if you can have somebody come with you. Lots of people have, especially if you're first time moving out, my dad came with me to be like, well, does the sink work and is the water pressure good and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily unusual to have multiple people come look. And if you're showing the place, it's good to have somebody there too, and if you can't have somebody with you, at least make sure somebody knows that you're doing this, where you're going, when you'll be back, stuff like that. And that's kind of just good, physical safety rules for anybody, especially if you are going to a big city or something like that especially if you don't know your way around yet and stuff, if you could tell people roughly where you're going, when you're expected back, and, have somebody you can call if you get lost or something like that. And then just ask a lot of questions. If you have friends or family who can help you out with phone calls or something, do it, or you sometimes provide references for past places you've lived, or you need to check on the references for somebody else. So then you have to do some phone calls and questions on that kind of stuff. And I've definitely had my mom help me out doing that before I really knew what I was looking for and stuff like that. And if you're on good terms with your parents, run everything by them and see if they agree with your, gut sense of whether this is a good, safe place to be and stuff. And then you can obviously work on the personality and finding the right fit of a roommate you can interact with. But, there's actual safety and then there's preference.
I would also like to add, kind of based off what you just said about kind of your gut feeling, Randy, is that, if you go check out a place, whether it's with your, you go with a parent or family member or a friend, if you get a feeling or a vibe that it's, a really crappy place or you don't feel safe in the area, it's okay. That's really okay. You don't have to say yes to the first place that you come across. It's okay to look around a little bit and you don't want to live in a place where, if you can help it, I should say, you don't want to live in a place where you're going to feel on edge or uncomfortable or scared because whether the apartment feels unsafe, whether that be the appliances or something, or that it could be a sketchy neighborhood or something, you don't. If you can help it, you don't want to live in a place where you're going to be uncomfortable. So it's okay to go with your gut feeling and, trust that what you're going to be comfortable with and what you're not.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Mm-hmm. I think I used to get somebody to drive by the neighborhood if possible, or tell me, is this a safe neighborhood in the first place? And then, well, yeah, I guess that's more about the location of the actual place you're going to live. But I had a situation where I was interviewing roommates, and I made sure that somebody was with me. It was my boyfriend at the time, and he really liked one person who I didn't like as much. And I really liked another person who he didn't like as much. And I went with the one that he liked, which, anyways, there's a reason he's not my boyfriend anymore. And it didn't work out. And I just really, I agree. Like, trust your gut. I had kind of a horrible roommate situation. Like, she left a glass of milk on the couch, like on the couch.
Ew.
Yeah. She would leave her shoes in the middle of the floor all the time, and I would trip over them. She would leave like crafting paint open on the kitchen table, and just like, and she was,
I've been there,
and it was terrible. So
I have had a very similar experience. Yeah.
So
not great.
Fear, it's just such an irrational fear that my roommate will end up being like some axe murderer or like serial killer or something.
That's why there's a screening process.
The majority of roommates are not serial killers.
Yeah, that's unlikely. But
one other
go ahead.
I listen to many true crime podcasts.
One point on that kind of relates to this though is if you have the kind of door you can do this, if it doesn't already come with a keyed locks to your bedroom, you can purchase and change out the doorknob so that you can have it locked from the outside with a key. So you can either lock yourself in or at least lock your stuff in when you go. Because I have had some unfortunate situations of not my roommates, but some friends that my roommates brought in who stole some stuff from me. So
I'd be choked.
It was only money. I say only because at least it was no sentimental value, but
still,
it was, anyways, it was fine. It was replaced. It was, but it also was not in my room. So that doorknob wouldn't have made a difference, but it's,
that's still a good point though.
If you are unsure for a bit or something, if the house creaks at night and you're a little bit creeped out, you can always lock your door and be inside.
Because that's the thing, like when you first move into, a new place, we all know what it's like at night when there's a creak, like sounds outside or like creaks of the house. Like you're a little on edge for the first maybe couple of weeks until you settle in a bit and you kind of learn, all the sounds and stuff. Because like I have, like I live in a duplex right now, and I'm in, like the upstairs side or like section of our side, and I just hear like creepy laughing and talking, and I'm like, oh my god, what the hell is going on? And it turns out it's my neighbor on the phone, but I could hear him through the vents. So it took me a little while to get like used to that. And an apartment or dorms or whatever, like any place where you share walls, you're going to hear sounds from your neighbors, whether it's them walking on the floor or hitting against the wall by accident, or there might be people having a fight or something. It's going to be a little sketchy at first.
Especially if you're moving out from like a single unit house of some type. Where it's only your family or at least your known tenants. If you have people downstairs or something you rent out to people on potentially four sides of you, depending on where your apartment is within the building.
It's definitely an adjustment, especially when you have like, let's be honest, most of us, especially when you move out for the first time, you're going to move into a, possibly a little bit older, perhaps more rundown apartment, and you're going to share walls with people, and it's going to be, in a neighborhood that you've never been before. And, like, I remember hearing people talking outside my house. I'm like, what's going on? Like, why are they by my house? Like, I'm like, oh, they're just walking down the sidewalk. It's not a big deal. But if you're by yourself or, it's a little nerve-wracking at first, but it does get better. You do settle in. You learn what's just a generic sound or a creepy sound, and you kind of, you figure out what to do to make yourself feel more comfortable. Like Randy said, having a locked bedroom door, if that's what makes you feel comfortable. Like I always have my cell phone beside my bed, so I can easily grab it if something is going on. Like always make sure your doors are locked at night, like stuff like that, right? Like there's just little
Steel
habits
rod
you get
behind
into.
one of my doors.
Yeah, right. Like, or yeah, I don't know, like you, yeah, just make sure you're, I don't know, a big thing I would say is like you get into a habit of, doing all your kind of quote unquote safety stuff before you go to bed. So like making sure your doors are locked. And I mean, that's the main one, I guess, but like you kind of get into that routine. Yeah. Right.
So is there any additional advice you would have for somebody who is moving out for the first time or considering moving out for the first time?
You will have to be, if not comfortable, at least willing with speaking up for yourself if there is something you need.
Very true.
There is somebody else in my building who is totally blind, and I do know them kind of peripherally. And one thing that I know my building management is not good at is they'll post notices on the front door and in the elevator that I'm sure 99% of the rest of the building can read in text format. But I know because of how well the building is not necessarily run, and from speaking to this other person, that they usually don't get these notices like emailed to them or anything. So if it's something that I think will affect them, I usually go like, knock, knock. Hi, did you, just so you know, there's paving out front, so Handy Dart can't park on the street, or, they're shutting down the elevator for, whatever reasons, etc. So you might have to put in a little more effort than you should in some cases to get, what are fairly minor accommodations, but be able to speak up for yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
And or get to know your neighbor or neighbors.
Yes.
Like make a friend with someone that lives in the building so that if stuff like that is going on.
Especially parcel shipments. They leave notices stuck to the front door, and it just has a print number written on top of it, and you won't even know it's there unless your face hits it. So I usually will deliver those to their doorknob and stick it right above.
Yeah.
I think something I just kind of like generally want to add is like, you're never going to feel 100% ready to move out. There's countless things you could go over in your head that you need to do or should do or didn't do. And it's, it's never going to be perfect. A lot of the time, your first experience, it's going to be interesting, and it's not always going to be what you hoped or expected. But I don't know. I think it's, having all the skills we talked about, like groceries, O&M, what have you, speaking up for yourself, like those are all really important to have in general, but also especially when moving out. And I think it's just, you're never going to feel 100% prepared. So if you're thinking about it and you want to do it, and you've planned it out and thought it out and organized it to the best that you can, take the jump. It's going to be a really good experience for you. I've been on my own for, I think, 7 years now or something. And like, I love my parents, but I also love having my own space and, not having to check in all the time, and like, having that freedom to do what I want and prove that I can do it is a really big thing for me. That's just something I wanted to add. You're never going to feel fully ready, and you can only really plan for it so much, but it's also going to be one of the best experiences of your life.
One more thing too is there shouldn't be any shame if you give it a try and 6 months or a year down the road, for some reason, it's just not working right now. And if you have the ability to go home, don't feel shame in that just because it didn't work out at the time.
I did that every summer if I took the summer off in university, I'd go back home for 3 months if I could, because one, my family's so far away and I, miss them, but also dorms are dorms. You get it gets kind of old after a while, at least in my experience. And it was nice to go home for a bit. I think I did that for like 3 summers in a row. I just went back for the summers, and a lot of people tend to do that usually if they live closer to their home, but I was able to make it work. And there's no shame in going back. There's no shame in even visiting for like a weekend or something. Like, I feel like there's it's a big deal. Like, oh, like, why are you visiting all the time? Like, you can't do it for yourself. But, we all, when you move up the first time, you might not have a whole lot of money, and your parents love when you come home and they cook for you for the most part, depending on the families, I guess. But my mom loves that. And, every kid goes home and raids their parents' fridge, no matter how old you are, I feel like. So
I told my parents that I would never come back after I moved out.
Oh, really?
I was like, nope, that's it. Once I'm out, I'm never coming back. I was like so determined. And I think a year and a half, two years after I moved out, I broke my leg really badly.
Oh,
And I had to move back in with my parents for like, actually, that was the first time I moved back home while I was healing and, literally taking handy dart to school one day a week. And anyways, it was pretty awful. And then after I came back from England, I had a period of time where I was kind of floundering and needing to figure out where I was going next. And I moved back home again. So yeah, never say never.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Or at least don't be too proud to change.
Well, and thankfully they didn't like make me eat my words, right? Oh no, you said you were never moving home. You're on your own. They welcomed me back and helped me out. And yeah, eventually
something else I kind of wanted to add is that, like, you can't, when you first move out, like we've said countless times, it's important to have O&M and all these life skills of like cooking, laundry, etc. But the more experience you get, like, you're not going to be the best at it at the beginning. Like Sean just ate bagels and, I probably didn't clean the shower as much as I should have, or what have you. Like, there's a lot, like, you don't want to cook. So, okay, let's just order pizza. Like, there's so many little things that you're going to plan, like, oh, I'll cook really healthy meals and, I'll do laundry every week on this day or what have you. That doesn't happen.
Change the sheets regularly.
Yeah. It doesn't always, your plan and your schedule does not always work, and it's going to change. A lot of things are going to change, but you're also going to learn a lot of really cool skills and like improve on the skills you already have. Like, I was a decent cook and baker when I first moved out, and now it's like my favorite thing to do. And even like the like O&M stuff, like I was terrified at the beginning to do that, but I knew I had to, and I knew it was up to me to figure it out. And the countless times I've turned in the wrong direction or, dropped a bag of groceries on the sidewalk because the bag handle snapped or what have you. Like, there's been so many little situations that you're not going to be able to plan for. But it's all kind of part of the experience. And you get a lot of really fun stories along the way. So.
And it doesn't hurt that if occasionally you want to eat ice cream for breakfast or cereal for dinner, there's nobody to stop you.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, very true.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much to all of you for being here. This has been very informative, and maybe we've inspired some others who are visually impaired to take the leap as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. If you have a question, a comment, a future topic request, please send us an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. Please share our podcast with a friend, like, subscribe, and join us next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Music for this podcast is composed by Sean Bishop and Clement Chow. Production and audio editing by Rob Minot. For more information about Blind Beginnings and the work it does to support children and youth who are blind and partially sighted, along with their families, visit us on the web at www.blindbeginnings.ca, and also remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.